My house was always filled with noise.
Not the happy kind. It was the yelling kind. The kind that made my stomach hurt.
Mom and Dad fought all the time. Their voices, sharp and loud, would echo through the house. I would hide in my room, wishing for silence, wishing for peace.
One day, after a particularly bad fight, I ran out. I couldn't take it anymore. Tears streamed down my face as I ran down the street.
The shouts from my house faded behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to escape. Jared's house was the opposite of mine. It was quiet, peaceful. His parents were kind and welcoming.
They offered me cookies and milk, their smiles genuine and warm.
Their home was filled with the aroma of baking bread and the sound of soft music. It was a stark contrast to the tension and anger that permeated my own house.
Jared and I became best friends. We spent hours playing video games, riding bikes, and just talking.
He was a good listener, always patient with my stories about my home life. At his house, I felt accepted, loved even. I cherished the moments of peace and normalcy I found in his family's embrace.
Jared's house was old, with creaky floorboards and dusty attics. It was the kind of house that whispered stories of the past, but I felt safe within its walls, more so than I ever did in my own home.
One afternoon, as we were playing in his attic, we stumbled upon a strange wooden board. It was covered in letters and numbers, with a small heart-shaped pointer resting on its surface.
What's that?
I asked, my curiosity piqued. Jared picked it up, blowing off the dust.
It's a Ouija board.
He whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. That night, I stayed over at Jared's. As we lay in his room, whispering secrets in the dark, we heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the attic door. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it sent shivers down my spine.
Did you hear that?
I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Jared nodded, his eyes wide with fear.
It's probably just the wind.
He said, his voice trembling slightly. But the scratching continued. It grew louder, more insistent. It was as if something was trying to get in. We huddled closer together, our fear growing with each passing moment. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence descended upon the room, heavy and suffocating. We held our breath, listening intently for any sound. Then a cold breeze swept through the room, chilling us to the bone. The attic door creaked open slowly. We didn't talk about what happened that night, but things started getting strange. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut for no reason. Whispers seemed to follow us around the house, always just out of earshot.
One evening, while having dinner with Jared's family, the lights flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness.
A cold spot settled over the table, sending a shiver down my spine.
It's just a power outage.
Jared's dad said calmly, lighting some candles. But I felt uneasy. It was as if something else was present in the room with us, something unseen and malevolent.
Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard a voice. It was a whisper, soft and raspy, coming from the corner of the room.
"Get out," it hissed. "Get out while you still can."
I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The room was empty, but I knew, with chilling certainty, that we were not alone in the house.
The strange occurrences continued. Footsteps in the hallway at night, disembodied voices calling our names, objects disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. The house felt heavy, oppressive, as if an unseen force was closing in on us.
One rainy afternoon, unable to ignore our growing fear any longer, we decided to use the Ouija board.
We snuck up to the attic, our hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity.
The attic was dark and dusty, the air thick with the smell of decay. We placed the Ouija board on the floor, our hands trembling slightly as we rested our fingers on the planchette.
Is anyone there?
Jared asked, his voice barely a whisper. The planchette remained motionless. We waited, holding our breath, but nothing happened. Just as we were about to give up, the planchette began to move. It slid slowly across the board, stopping on the letter Y.
IES.
It spelled out, each letter sending a fresh wave of fear through us. We were communicating with something from beyond. That night I couldn't sleep. The events of the day played over and over in my mind. The Ouija board, the voice in the darkness, the feeling of being watched. Fear gnawed at my insides, keeping me awake.
A storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within me. Rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled like a banshee. Thunder shook the house, each boom echoing in the silence of the night.
Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It was Jared. I scrambled out of bed and raced to his room. The door was wide open and a cold wind whipped through the room, sending papers flying.
The man.
Jared was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with terror, pointing towards the corner of the room.
The Shadow Man.
I didn't see anything at first, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A dark figure, tall and gaunt, lurking in the shadows. It had no discernible features, just a void where its face should be. Fear, primal and consuming, surged through me.
We huddled together, paralyzed by terror, as the Shadow Man glided closer. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, as if it were a part of the darkness itself. The room grew colder, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. The Shadow Man stopped just inches from us, its unseen eyes boring into us. I could feel its cold, malevolent gaze piercing my soul.
And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The room was silent again, the only sound the pounding of our hearts. We were left shaken and terrified, the image of the Shadow Man seared into our minds.
The next morning, we decided to investigate.
Armed with flashlights and our hearts pounding with nervous anticipation, we crept back up to the attic.
Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through the grimy window, cobwebs hung from every corner, and the air was thick with the smell of must and decay. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the silence.
We found it tucked away in a dusty corner, hidden beneath a pile of old clothes, a leather-bound diary.
The cover was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age.
We huddled together, our breaths held in anticipation, as we opened the diary. The handwriting was spidery and faded, the ink barely visible on the brittle pages. It was the diary of a young girl who had lived in the house many years ago. She wrote of strange occurrences, of whispers and shadows, of an evil presence that haunted the house.
As we read on, our blood ran cold.
The girl in the diary had been terrorized by the same entity that haunted us. She described the Shadow Man in chilling detail, his cold, empty eyes, his ability to move through shadows.
She wrote of the Ouija board, how she had used it to communicate with the other side, how it had warned her of the danger that lurked within the house. And then, the most terrifying entry of all, she wrote of a ritual, a way to trap the entity, to banish it from the house forever. But the ritual had gone wrong. The entity had become even more powerful, and it had claimed her as its own. The diary ended abruptly.
We looked up from the diary, our faces pale with fear.
The attic seemed to close in on us, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread.
We were trapped, just like the girl in the diary.
Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, we decided to search for the girl's room.
We followed the diary's cryptic clues, our hearts pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation.
The house seemed to resist our efforts, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath our feet, the shadows seeming to deepen around us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we found it. The door was slightly ajar, and a musty odor wafted from within.
We pushed the door open slowly, our flashlights piercing the darkness.
The room was frozen in time. Dolls sat perched on a dusty vanity, their painted eyes seeming to follow our every move. A child's drawings adorned the walls, their cheerful colors a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the room.
And then we saw it. In the far corner of the room, beneath a cobweb-covered window, lay a small, wooden chest. It was ornately carved, but the wood was dark and cracked with age.
We approached it cautiously, our hearts pounding in our chests.
As we reached the chest, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness.
A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, followed by an eerie silence. Suddenly, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the chest. It grew in intensity, illuminating the room in a ghostly white light. And then, the chest slowly creaked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed lace, lay a single porcelain doll, but this was no ordinary doll. Its eyes, once painted a cheerful blue, were now empty, black pits that seemed to stare directly into our souls, and its lips were curled into a sinister, knowing smile.
We stumbled back in horror, our blood turning to ice in our veins.
The doll's head turned slowly, its empty eyes fixing on us with an unnerving intensity.
We knew then, with chilling certainty, that we were not alone in the house. The house was truly haunted.